welcome to episode 4 of Sloan the Record, recording on January 7th, releasing on January 11th, 2025. My name is Nathan Sloan, and joining me, as usual, is my father, Ron. Each week we're going on the record about family history, past and present. Along the way, we'll see if we can't learn more about the people, traditions, values, and stories that made us, and open a window for everyone else to see a little slice of life in rural North Carolina. New episodes are published every Sunday, so we welcome you to join us on the journey. You can make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or the podcast service of your choice. And just on the record here about the name, yes, I know Sloan the Record does not rhyme with on the record, but we're just going to go with it. It is a record of Sloans, so just wanted to get that out here in episode 4. It's close, but it's not an exact rhyme. Okay, so anything new going on with you?
No, just trying to stay warm.
It is extremely cold here in central North Carolina. We don't have, there's rumors of snow coming, but we don't have, I think it's, looking at my watch right now, it's 28 degrees outside right now. So I wouldn't be surprised if that drops further tonight, and we may get into the teens here in the next few days. So definitely very unusual for North Carolina to get that cold. I mean, it gets pretty cold, but we've got our furnaces rolling. You may be able to hear his furnace. I don't know. He's sitting in a room right next to his furnace, so that's what that noise is, and it's understandably needed when it is this cold outside. Okay. Well, to the subject of this week's episode, last week, just to recap briefly, was the second part of talking about Eldon Sloan, and now we're going to move into talking about his other half, which is Margaret Excelle Sloan. Johnson was her maiden name, and we are going to take this as we go. It might end up being a two-parter like Eldon's was, but we're going to find out here by just diving right into the topic. So I guess I'll do a brief little lead-in of what I know of Grandma. She was Grandma to me, so she wasn't Excelle, but maybe that's a good place to start. The name Excelle, I don't know of anyone else named Excelle. Do you know anything about where that came from?
Yeah, I do. She has told me about that a couple of times, and of course it's what she was told. But she was the 8th child in the family. I think there was like a 20-year spread between the oldest and my mother. I think, as I was told, the doctor, after delivering her, said, "Miss Johnson, I need a name to put on the birth certificate." And Grandma, probably pretty worn out from the labor and everything, you name her. And which Mother was not real thrilled with, with hearing this is the way it came. But
I guess if you've had 7 other children, eventually you're just like, look, I've run out of names.
Yeah, just whatever. But she said to him, "You name her." And he did. He took her at her word there, and he gave her the first name of Margaret, which was my grandmother's name, Margaret Johnson. Everyone referred to her as Maggie. Mm-hmm. And the name Excelle, it's really kind of a sad story, but when he was in undergraduate school, he fell in love with this co-ed whose name was Excelle, Excelle. And when he finished school to go on to medical school, they, as I understand it, her family moved, and he lost track and spent the rest of his life trying to find her, and never found her. And he never married. And at the time my mother was born, he was an older man and, still had not married. He was still in hopes of finding her. And so he named my mother's middle name Excelle in honor or memory or whatever of this girl that he had loved so much and had lost. So it's kind of an interesting way to get a name, and kind of a bittersweet story that the name had a lot behind it from him. But,
Yeah. So you said Excel just then, and that's how most people would pronounce it, Excel. But the way I always heard it pronounced was XL, like exhale.
mhm.
Like the emphasis was on the cell almost. Excel.
Well, she signed things, a lot of her drawings and things that she did. I don't know what stage in her life before she was married. She signed them XL.
So she went by XL her whole life.
Yeah.
That's interesting
I mean-
that maybe they didn't, the conversation that we had about juniors and whatnot, maybe her mom didn't want her to go by the same name, Margaret, and so they just referred to her as her middle name since that was her mom's name.
Well, it was interesting too, depending on where she was, around Columbia Springs, where she grew up, and the Kipling area, where my grandmother ended up living. She was known as Excel. And then when we lived in Broadway, she was known as Margaret. I don't know if it's because of the first name and people went by first names. But as a result, depending on where you knew her from, some people called her Margaret and some called her Excel.
Okay. All right. Well, that's I think I'd heard parts of that story before, but now to hear it again, that's a good refresher because it is an unusual name. But of course, seems like names back then just were more unusual in general. I guess you always had a lot of Johns, Williams, and whatnot, but Eldon, that's not a name that I hear too frequently either. So I don't know if that's, you said it was Scottish. Fleming was in there. Maybe that's some kind of influence there as well. But anyway, my recollections of grandmother always just very much the matriarch of the family. Very, very sweet, very kind. Exactly what you'd think of when you think of grandmother. Somebody that always asks, wants to know how you're doing, but she was also very reserved in a way, which is, we talked about similarities and differences between you and your dad, and I see similarities with you and grandma, but I also see a difference in you and grandma, and that's that, she was a little more quiet, a little more, at least later in life, when around the time that I knew her, she seemed to be content to have conversations with people one-on-one, but wasn't real big on being in the center of attention and making things about her. That didn't seem to be her deal at all. Every time I'd see her when I was a teenager or college aged, it would always be, "Are you keeping those girls at arm's length?" So she had a good sense of humor, and she loved to joke around and keep things light, and I just will always be able to hear her voice in my head because she had the most unusual Southern accent. I know I have a Southern accent, but she, it wasn't unusual, I'm sure, to her. I'm sure that's the way a lot of folks talked around that area, but no one else in my life have I heard talk the way she did. She would pronounce my name Nathaniel, and that's just a sweet memory that I always have. Sometimes I'll say that I told Emily that story, and sometimes she'll call me Nathaniel. It's just nice to kind of have that little memory of how it was never Nathan. She never shortened it. But yeah, I remember her being just a very seemingly strong woman of faith, And I can remember my baptism and her being there at the baptism and pulling me aside and saying, this is the most important day of your life, and I wanted to give you something that you'd remember it by. And she gave me a little gold pocket watch I've still got somewhere. So yeah, she was just. I feel like you were always trying to get me to spend more time with her. She had so many grandchildren, and I think, man, that's got to be a lot to have as many grandchildren as she had, and try and keep up with them and spend time with each of them individually. So logistically, I'm sure there were some challenges there, but I never doubted that she thought a lot of me and cared for me and always asked how I was doing and that sort of thing. And just I guess if some people who didn't know her, she was almost like the queen of the family to me, like setting an example of how you should treat other people, setting an example of just dignity and having you didn't hear her talk ill of people. So it was always about positivity. It was, I don't have time for gossip. And that I really respected and still respect about her. Is it was almost like the queen of England in a sense, she who has to remain politically neutral or whatever, but everybody loves her from all different walks of life. She was able to hold the line and just be a loving force, like a positive force, a uniting force for the family. And I think I'll take a lot away from just having observed her quietly in my life, and I do think so much of what our parents and grandparents do, we're always watching from the time that we're little kids, and so much of that does carry down, and we absorb it probably more than we realize, and it makes its way into our personality. So especially when we have good parents and grandparents. So that's something that I can say about Grandma Sloan is I feel like I'm a little bit better for having known her and having had her in my life. So that's my bit, but I had her in my life for a fraction of the time that you had her in your life. So I don't know how much detail we'll be able to get in one episode, but what do you know? She had 7 siblings, you said. What do you know about her childhood and her upbringing?
Well, she grew up on a farm. The crop I remember her talking the most about was cotton. And I guess she talked about that more because even as a young child, she could participate and she could pick cotton. And, you dragged or drug a sack behind you and picked the cotton and put it in the sack. And she told me about that and how disappointed she would be after hours and hours and hours they go weigh the cotton. And it was just a fraction of what it felt like it should be. She's, talked to me about some of the animals they had, mules, which she still recalled their names, and riding those. She told me, and others told me too, which was always strange, as feminine as she was, and as beautiful as she was, and even her pictures as a little girl, she was very pretty, very, very feminine, but she said she had a reputation for being a tomboy. She was a tree climber, and she could outshoot the boys at a bean shooter, and she carved and played hard. And as I said, she was all the ones closest to her in age were brothers, and she played with them and tried to hang in there with them. She loved sports and was very athletic, which was the gene she selfishly withheld from me. She was co-captain of her basketball team her junior and senior year in high school. And I remember people that I would meet growing up talking about her that went to school with her, about how she could play, how good she was at basketball. None of us got that. The Sloan gene must have been really strong on the opposite side of that to offset her capabilities. But even when she was in her 80s and 90s, she still moved with a grace. She kept that, I guess, that athleticism of body movement and posture and just how she moved that showed she was in control of herself there.
And I mean, hey, lived into your 90s, so that says something about keeping your physical health up too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from what I understand, my grandfather, her father, she had a reputation for being mischievous, and she got that, no doubt, from him, which I think several of the children had that. But she has told Elizabeth, my daughter, and Melissa more about my grandfather than she told me. But one of the things I recall was her telling was about pranks that he would pull on them, his kids. And one of them, she said that Uncle Gilmore was reading a book outside, and he was sitting downhill under a tree reading, and kind of leaned back, laying down. And she said her dad got up and got the hoe and went out in the yard. And back then they chopped all the grass out of the yard. And I don't know why, unless it was to keep the chickens from coming out there and pooping everywhere where you'd step in it. But chickens would eat grass, and so they chopped and raked and swept the yard. They made brooms out of broom straw, and they would sweep the yard off to keep it clean. And I don't know which would be worse, the mowing we do or I think we've got it better. But so he got out there like he was cleaning up the yard with a hoe, and started down there near Gilmore and worked his way back up the hill. And Gilmore, of course, when he saw what he was doing, he was chopping up little pieces of grass, getting them up and so forth, so he didn't pay him any attention. And Mother said he took the corner of the hoe and trenched all the way up the hill to where the well was, and drew up a bucket of water and poured in the trench and just let it run down the hill and soak in behind him. And then all of a sudden, he had Mom come up there and watch him. And, it took a few minutes for it to get there, and then for him to realize that something cold and wet was under him. and Granddad, she said, had a great, he just loved doing mess like that. And Mother had a lot of mischief about her.
Pranking his own children?
Yeah, pranked his own children. Can you imagine?
Well, people still do that today, so I guess that's a long-standing tradition of parents.
Yeah, but that I enjoyed hearing that story, and it kind of explained to me some of my makeup and some of the things that I do. But I think that was one of the things I saw when you were asking the last session about how they were like and how they were different, was that Dad was more of a serious nature. He had a really good sense of humor, but he didn't voice his humor as much as he reacted to other people's humor. I found out, later in life, he had more. He would voice more and say more than he did early on. I guess he was trying not to encourage us in that direction, probably, because he took that role pretty serious. And, I went on a trip with a lot of Mom's friends were on the trip that she goes to church with, or went to church with, and I was having fun, and several of them would comment at things that I said or did. They'd say, well, we know where you got that from. Their reaction was that they recognized my off-the-wall humor and that it was rooted in her because of hers. And
I remember. I'll always remember her laugh because she could tell a story and get herself so tickled she'd start laughing in the middle of the story, and she just did have such a good sense of humor and willingness to share it with people.
Yeah, one of my favorite memories of her humor, though I was on one episode of it, I was the victim. But she got these little catalogs, and if you remember, she would have stacks of little catalogs stashed all over the house. You'd see them in different places. These little direct mail catalogs that would come in, and a lot of them were just full of little junk and prank things and stuff. And she would order some of those things and have fun with them. But the one that
whoopee cushions and stuff.
Well, very similar. She was into an updated whoopee cushion, and maybe you got a little bit of her in you too, which I'll relate here in a minute. But in this particular thing, what she did, she had later in life, after Dad passed away, she formed a little group of widows, and she named the group, and they would get together. If one of them, she would say, okay, they were all kind of staying in their house, just staying at home and not doing anything. And she said she realized she had a choice. She could sit home and hurt, or she could get out and do something. And so she called a neighbor, Hortense Parker, and Osley Spainhour, and Anita Patterson, and Miss Brown. I can't think of her first name now. But she called them and said, listen, I'm coming to get you on Tuesday. I'm going to pick you up Tuesday morning. We're going to breakfast. And she got them all in the car, and there they go. And so that became a routine thing. If one of them had a doctor's appointment, their kids didn't have to take them to the doctor's appointment. Their children, Mom would pick them up, take them to the doctor's appointment. All of them would go, and then they'd leave there and go somewhere and have lunch, do things like that. And one particular time, Mom had a Mrs. Womble, Thelma Womble, I believe was her name, but she was right much older than Mom. She was like in her 90s when Mom was still driving. And she let Miss Womble in on what she was going to do, because Onita and Mrs. Brown, who were next door neighbors, and they were just like sisters at each other, and they quarreled with each other just like sisters and so forth. But Mother had ordered this little, it was a 2-part prank thing, and it was, to be polite, a poop machine. And it had a little speaker about the size of a key fob that she would put in the back seat between Miss Brown and Miss Patterson. And then you had a fob up there in your hand,
A remote control.
A remote control, and every time you hit that button, it would make a different sound, like passing gas. Very realistic. And they were going to lunch or whatever they were doing, and she would keep hitting that thing, firing it off. And they were threatening each other and arguing. I did not. That was you. Don't you try to blame that on me, And and Mother said that Thelma would just have her head down on the dash, have her arms on the dashboard of the car, just bent over double, trying not to laugh out loud to where they knew that she knew what that she was in on it. But I was the victim of it before I heard of it on Christmas. You remember how we would all gather in the dining room and the living room, that big open room, and the kids would all sit on the floor, and we'd let the kids open their gifts first, and then the adults would open theirs. And Mom had that thing, and she was sitting over in the dining room area with my brother-in-law, and I was sitting in the opposite end of the room, in what used to be Dad's chair that had a magazine rack beside it. And she had put that little speaker in the magazine rack. I didn't really even hear it to start with, but the little kids in front of me did. Mm-hmm. And I wondered why they kept turning around and giving me this incredulous look, like, and I was like, why?
A literal stink eye.
Yeah, the literal stink eye. They kept turning around and looking at me just like, I can't believe this. Then I happened to look and see John, just his head down on the dining table where he was sitting across from Mother, and just crying. His face was red as a beet. And every time one of those little kids would turn around and react, he would just get out of breath. And it was, he knew what was going on, and I didn't have a clue. Mm-hmm. Until finally I heard this, you know, and I was like, what was that? And the kids turned around again, and then I was like, that wasn't me, you know. Yeah. And of course she was laughing just like John was and enjoying watching me.
Was she off in the corner triggering it?
Yeah, she was sitting across across the dining table, triggering the thing, and you know, hitting it, and it would, like I said, it could do some real squeakers. It was amazing. But she had a lot of mischief. Yeah. And you know, the funny thing with her sense of humor was, growing up, I didn't think she had one, much less a good one. You know, nothing I did seemed to trigger the funny bone. It seemed like, you know, it triggered the switch. But
well, do you think you were a good child, or were you the problem child?
Oh, I was the problem child, no doubt. I mean,
really?
I was the middle kid. Eldon, you know, he had to wear a hat to hide his halo when he got embarrassed. And Elaine, you know, here she comes along, and she's the first girl. Uh-huh. So she was born with a halo, and I was between them, so I got pointed at from both directions. Okay. Know. I was in the crossfire, the pointing, blaming, so it just landed on me naturally. But they make up terrible tales about me and things that I did, and
make up. Maybe I'll have to ask them about that. We can get some sibling perspective on the show, and you can refute those claims in person. Well, who knows?
I know some things I did too. You know,
he's already walking it back.
I did convince Elaine that a red cayenne pepper was a candy carrot.
That's brutal.
And refused to give her any. Said, no, you'll eat the whole thing. And I finally consented to give her one bite. And of course, she tried to get as big a bite as she could. And I was like, I tried to stop her.
Oh my gosh, you're terrible.
But you know, so
sounds to me like Grandma knew exactly that her mischievous nature. She knew how to spot it when she saw it.
Probably recognized it, but you would have thought she'd have been more of an ally. You know,
I imagine it's different when you're a parent and you're trying to raise kids and you just want to keep the peace. You know, that's why I know parents that will refuse to have a 2-row vehicle because they can't have their kids sitting next to each other. They need a 3-row vehicle so they can put them in the back, because otherwise you're just spending all your time sorting out their quarrels with each other.
I heard who was that famous basketball coach from North Carolina? I think
Dean
it's a
Smith?
Wake Forest. It was a Wake Forest coach back when I was a kid, and he did a lot of speaking after he retired from coaching. You know, public speaking, people would hire him to go to things. I cannot remember his name right now, but I'm sure there are probably a lot of people listening that are saying his name as they're listening to this. But I remember going to hear him one time, and he said most of his child rearing years he drove with one hand because the other hand was over the back of the seat swatting back and forth. And he said, I didn't always get the right one, but I always got one. Yeah, you know, popping their legs, trying to get them to straighten out. But Bones McKinney, that was his name.
Okay, there you go. Came back to you.
Still works.
So,
pretty sure that was it.
yeah, the going back to Grandma's life, then moving on along. What do you know about her education? Didn't she further her education past high school to some degree?
Mm-hmm. Interesting thing there. You know, speaking of her education, she was an incredibly gifted artist, and her real desire was to go to art school. But at that time, women involved in arts was considered bohemian. You know, that it was a bohemian lifestyle, and you know, nice girls didn't get involved in that. And I was told that my granddad did not want her to go to art school because he was concerned about the influences and how that might make things go. So she went to Campbell, and I think it was when it was a 2-year school. That probably would have been, let's see, she was born 1919, so she, you know, probably 18 years beyond that. So the mid-20s or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, mid-30s.
Mid-30s would make
Mid-30s.
Maybe even late 30s.
Yeah, maybe late 30s. But anyway, she went there and she took business courses, you know, to work within business and, you know, in secretarial skills and so forth.
In the last episode, that she was working at some sort of office, and that's where Granddad met her.
Yeah, the Agricultural Extension Office, I believe, is what it was. It was called the ASCS or something like that. But
was that in Lillington?
That was in Lillington. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So she got a job doing that at some point. Do you know if she held any other jobs?
No.
She pretty much was stay-at-home mom.
Yeah.
When she got married and had kids, right?
Yeah.
So,
and even my granddad lived with us. In fact, he died not too long before I was born, you know, while she was pregnant. But she stayed at home. I don't think she worked after they got married.
Mm-hmm.
That if someone, my sisters or someone may know different, but I never knew her anyway to be any, you know, she was, you know, what I felt like the most important job in the world. She was a stay-at-home mom. And, you know, she was the neighborhood fixer. You know, she could do anything. She could make toys. She could make costumes. You know, if we had plays at school, she made costumes. I remember Eldon in the Cub Scouts was Robin Hood. And they did, you know, Robin Hood and his merry men. And she made the costumes for all the little kids, the hats and Friar Tuck's outfit and all that stuff. And then, you know, she made horses for us, you know, like stick horses. Mm-hmm. But they had, you know, really nice heads on these horses. And she did the coolest things, like she'd get a board to cut the horse's head out of, and she would put a knot in the board where it would be the eye of the horse and draw it out around that. and it was like on both sides of his head, so it went right through. It was perfect, and a big brown eye that looked almost three-dimensional, the way knots will look sometimes. And that was, she was very creative, very artistic, and she could just figure out things.
I love hearing that there's somebody that's like creative and artistic and also athletic and enjoys sports, because you so frequently, at least I did, it was framed as either you're into music and art and creative stuff, or you pour yourself into hobbies like sports, but the two were sort of exclusive. And I don't know, maybe that's just a warped perception that I had growing up, and that's totally made up. And that may be because you were not that athletic, as you said earlier, and you were not into sports, but I saw you as being a pretty creative person. But that's something, as I've gotten older, I've learned. Some of my favorite musicians are also really into sports of one sort or another, or sometimes folks that play sports, like Grandma, can also be good at fine art and crafting and things like that. So it's really cool to see that there's just a broad spectrum of we don't have to pigeonhole ourselves in one thing. Like, you can be good at several different things, or you can be passionate about and interested in several different, seemingly different areas of life.
And she had interest in a lot of different things, and she was really good at whatever she did. She loved hardware stores, and she's the one that had the tools at the house. And if you remember the that mix of things, she was, I've made my life through creativity, made my living, and she had that creativity. That's where I got it from, and she was my first art teacher. But she was also extremely organized. It's like those don't usually go together.
Yeah, I was about to say I see similarities in you and her, but now that you say organized, I don't see that. No, we'll probably talk. We're not going to be able to get through everything, as I suspected, in one episode. We'll probably talk more about, hey, what are some similarities we see here and there, and do that in the next episode. But I will say, in sort of wrapping things up in this episode, a couple of things that you've said about her have stood out to me, and that is her being the fixer, that even people in the community knew, other kids knew that they could come and Miss Sloan would be able to fix their toy or whatever, that she was good with tools and a problem solver. Those are all things and attributes that, growing up, I thought, like, there's nothing in the world that Dad couldn't fix. Like, he could take, because I'd break something and it would shatter into a million pieces, and you'd figure out a way to patch it up and make it work again. And even well into high school and college, I go, at least I've got this resource of Dad. I can call him, and he'll come up with 3 or 4 different ideas for ways that we could get around it or make it work or fix it or what have you. So I do see that aspect. And then also, of course, as you mentioned, your creativity. You've gone into a career that's in a creative field, so that's and your artistic ability, which is something that I always hated, seemed skipped me, and you would say, oh, well, you just have to practice at it. And yeah, there's some degree of, like, if you practice hard enough, if you want it hard enough, you can excel at any art. But there's also some natural gifting there as well. You have to be naturally curious, and I played guitar, and I taught myself how to play guitar basically over a period of 6 months, because I really wanted to learn guitar, but it wasn't by osmosis. I didn't just pick up a guitar and suddenly I could play. I started playing hot cross buns, and gradually added until I could play chords, and I could play and strum, and then I could strum and sing and do things like that. With drawing, every time I would try to draw, and I drew a lot. I drew a lot in school and notebooks and stuff, and doodled all the time. I never felt like I made that next leap to being able to imagine things in a third dimension and apply shadows and gradients and things to make stuff really look real. And I do wonder if that's something maybe you got from her, is that ability to see things a little bit differently and translate the 3D stuff to 2D space. Or were you really terrible to begin? Because I know there's that beautiful painting of the horses that you did when you were what age?
It was 8th grade.
So, 8th grade, and I wish I could get a picture to put in front of what that looked like, but, I'd be proud as could be to do that as an adult. And so, is that, you mentioned before, I think, to me, that she kind of encouraged the arts with you. Do you think she identified that early on? Or just talk to me a little bit about her and arts and you and how that was intertwined and cultivated.
Well, I grew up seeing things that she had drawn, and she had this set of pastels that I guess still exist in fragments. And I would see, some things she would do in pastels, mostly in pencil. On the bookcase outside my bedroom was a drawing of her nephew, Gordon Connor, who was her sister's, BB's, only son. And he was a really, really handsome man, especially as a young man. He looked like he could have been a male model. And my mother had drawn a pencil portrait of him that I thought for years was a photograph. I didn't realize that it was a drawing. And then one day I was going through something, I found the photograph that she drew it from. And she drew it at a whole different size. But I couldn't believe it looking at it, and I was fascinated with it. And she had some art books that I was fascinated with too. I remember one in particular that she edited by gluing some pages together with library paste that she didn't want me to see what was between the pages, but I finally managed to steam them apart enough to that's why these are glued together. I thought I was fixing something, but then I realized, that was deliberate. And she entertained us drawing. Like she'd, of course, read books to us and things like that, but she would draw things for us too. I can remember especially when we were sick or something, she would get us in her lap and try to get our mind off how we felt by sitting there and getting a piece of paper or a piece of cardboard. They used to have white cardboard that would come in the shirts from the laundry, so they'd fold square, and they were a great surface to draw on, especially with a ballpoint pen. And I've got in my living room now a sketch she did of a river scene, just out of her head. She had gone to the beach with Marilyn and her family, and Anna Grace had gotten sick, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, and one of them had been sick. I think it was Anna Grace, and they went to a doctor down at the beach. And Mother got a piece of paper and sat there to entertain Anna Grace and drew this picture with she had a black big ballpoint pen, and she drew this thing, and I saw it at her house. She'd gathered up with her stuff, and I was at her house and saw it, and I was like, "What is this?" and pulled it out, and she said, "Oh, that was just something I was doodling to, while we were at the doctor's office to entertain her." And I said, "Can I have this?" And she said, "What in the world do you want that for?" And it's hanging in my living room. I've got it framed in there, but she didn't think much of it. But I grew up without a TV, as I mentioned before, so reading and drawing were, key entertainment.
Oh yeah, if you
for
couldn't
me.
go outside, especially you're stuck
Yeah.
inside, it's raining or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. And so, her drawing and then me trying to draw something. And I like to take comic books and find my favorite picture of the Lone Ranger in silver, drawn just perfectly, I thought. And then I would take that to the dining room table and sit there with a piece of paper and try to recreate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I was pretty good at horses, because a lot of the things we read were Roy Rogers, comic books with all the Gene Autry and Hopalong Cassidy and all of those from my early youth. And then it was pointed out to me at some point that I drew all the horses' hoofs backwards, and which is kind of interesting. And but she would point things out to me and show me, okay, do this, and she showed me little tricks. I remember the first portrait that I did. I had a crush on my sixth grade teacher, Peggy McGirt, and I just thought she was so pretty and she was so sweet, and I thought she must just love me to death because she set me right in front of her desk. And I found out when I was older, talking to her, that it was so she could keep me in check. And but
I'm getting a picture in this episode of a problem child, not only at home but abroad as well.
right, I don't know. I always had a problem presenting myself to females and them relating to me the way I wanted them to. And I was a bit awkward, to say the least, and things that I did to get her attention got her attention. I was successful at that, but it was not exactly the attention that I wanted. But I had such a crush on her, and I think she realized that or something, because she gave me one of her school portraits, the little wallet-sized pictures,
Uh-huh.
and they were black and whites, and I just thought she was so pretty. She was Scottish, and she had these apple cheeks that just, high cheekbones that just showed up so pretty. And so I decided that I was going to do a portrait of her. And my mom, stood over my shoulder and helped me do it. And it actually turned out pretty good, except for the places where I rubbed through the paper erasing things. But
What grade was that again?
that was the sixth grade.
Sixth grade, okay.
And it turned out pretty good. Shame I don't have pictures of any of these things, but when I gave it to her, she was just, I thought I'd done something wrong, because her eyes teared up, and I thought, what have I done now? I could understand the clay copperhead that I put in her desk drawer. We're getting the reaction it got. But, I couldn't understand, trying to give her something really nice, that she reacted that way. But one of the tricks Mother showed me was, she said, you're used to looking at it here this way. Now, bring it in here and hold it up to the mirror. And when I held it up to the mirror, I went, God, one eye's bigger than the other. And she said, yeah, you can see it now because you're not seeing it the way you've been seeing it.
Yeah.
And I can remember years and years and years, even through college, I'd be working on something. I'd take it into the bathroom there at the dorm and hold it up in front of the big mirror, and where I could, really look at it and study it, and I could see things that all of a sudden looked strange to me,
Yeah.
did not balance. And so she was she encouraged the creativity, and encouraged us in art, and all of my siblings inherited that skill. I was the only one that's they had options for what they could do. And Miss Elsie Stewart, who was my counselor at school that helped us, in applying to colleges and everything, she steered me towards East Carolina because she said they have a wonderful school of art. And I think she saw that as, well, maybe that's a possibility. Let's see if we can get him down there.
Well, that's a good lead for a future episode down the road where we talk about ECU and all that. But we're going to have to wrap things up because we're already running long on this episode. So no entertainment recommendations this week. We'll have to skip that and add it into next week's. So be thinking about that over the next week. Books, TV shows, music you like to listen to. It can be anything, or just something new that's interesting that's going on in town or in Johnston County or current events wise that you want to talk about. All right, so that's going to wrap things up for this episode. We will pick back up with Excelle Sloan Part 2 next week. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.